Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the very basic tool that you can make yourself called a scratch stock. Hope you enjoy. So what is a scratch stock? Block of wood with a piece of metal in it essentially, with whatever shape you want, as you can see here, just around in this case. OGs, any sort of molding that you want to do, scratch stock is probably the easiest way to do it. Now the beauty of a scratch stock over something like a Stanley 45 with blades is that, well, one, you can make the shape that you want yourself, and you don't have to buy it. It's fairly free. You can just use some offcuts of an old card scraper you're no longer going to use, or an old saw plate, something like that. Now, when it comes to scratch stocks, you can have them up to about 3mm like this one here, and generally most of them, because there are dedicated planes that do this job, and they have something around the size that I've got here, which is about 1.5mm in thickness, which is the standard. Most people like around that 1.5mm, which I think is 0.03 of an inch, something like that. So let's jump down here and we'll have a closer look at the scratch stock, how it works, and then we'll go ahead and make one of our own using this blank that I have here. So you can go in both directions with it, and it truly doesn't care about grain because it's a scraper essentially. And so we just work it back and forwards. So let me just quickly take this apart just so you can. So that's got to be wedged in there. This one, obviously, as I said, I quickly put it together. You ideally want some screws with a nut on the back because it will hold it better. So we can see that I added this shape to this one here. Now, the way this works is relying on a sharp 90-degree edge here and here, and it's that 90-degree edge that we scrape across the surface. So that's what's taking the scrape, and we just do a holder that allows us to do that with much more force and much easier. So we're familiar with a card scraper. This is one without a hook on the edge, and we can see here the same thing. We can scrape it, and it's that system of the square 90 degrees that you have with a card scraper. And obviously we run hooks on our card scrapers to make them do better, but in this case you don't have to. And if it gets blunt, you just take it back out and just sharpen on these flats a little bit, and then you restore your sharp edge here and you're good to go again. So now that we know what it is, how it operates, and how it works, let's jump in and actually make ourselves one. So I've got this piece of 1.5mm steel here, as I mentioned before, that we're going to use, and we're going to use this piece of wood as a holder for this one. I could reuse this one, but I want to show you exactly the different variations that you can use. Now, when it comes to choosing steel for these, as I said, you can use an old saw plate, a bit of an old card scraper or a cheap card scraper that you can get off Temu, fairly inexpensive if that is something you want to do. Now, you don't need hardened steel. You can just use mild steel. This one here is just mild tool steel, but you don't even need tool steel. So a bit of spring steel I find works pretty well. And around that 1.5mm thickness is really best, because it actually cuts through the timber better when it's thinner like this versus this, it's twice the thickness. It just doesn't cut through and does tend to ride a little bit. So this thinner stock actually just does a better job. I did see online that you can use sections of 1-inch bandsaw blade, which is quite common, and you just want to be careful that you don't cut yourself on the teeth, and you will shape the back of a bandsaw blade, which is soft steel, not hardened, and so you've got no problems there. So as I said, you don't need tool steel, you don't need hardened steel. Mild steel is perfect because it's easy to shape, easy to sharpen, and essentially a scratch stock is almost a throwaway tool in some regards. You want this to be relatively accurate for where your fence sits, but I'm actually not going to come in far. We're going to bring this in maybe 10 mil. It's just a little notch. You don't actually want a lot there. Now for this one, we're going to make this fence square, because we're just going to run it on a piece of a straight board. If you want to run this on a circle, what you want to do is actually curve this fence section, which allows you to run round, because yes, you can use these because they don't care about grain. They actually work pretty well for actually shaping the end grainer boards as well. So you don't have to worry about it sort of chipping the fibers out because it's scraping it. It does happen still to a degree, but it's much easier to work doing that than it is using a blade. So I'm going to come off this bottom section where I've got a few radiuses, which is not a bad thing. And we're just going to put a line here. I'll work out how far up we're coming in a sec. I'm just going to run that line across the bottom. And up the other side. And so what I want to do is come along this way here. We want to take all the big bit here out. Got it secured down, and as always when we want our accuracy, what do? We bring a chisel in and hope that the hold fast is holding. So we're going to saw down to that baseline. Establish a curve, then run down. So the accuracy of sawing this line matters less than the fence. The fence is the most important part. But obviously we want to get this as accurate as we can. Vibrating too much. Let me just drop it down. Alright. You can hear the big difference in the sound there. I'm just going to bring it up so it's fully clear. And I'm obviously not going to be able to fully saw it with this saw. So what I'm going to do is just angle the saw. I'm just going to finish it off with a Ryoba. I'm not a big fan of them, but it works well for this. So you can see now we're left with a 90 degrees here, a flat piece here. So the next thing we want to do is run a kerf line down the middle of this board. So we'll bring the marking gauge in again and just try and eyeball our center. You can see we've got two lines there. It just needs to go across a titch more. And that'll be good there. So now we just run. Now we have our kerf roughly down the middle. So this is the first step. You get your piece of metal, square it off so you're just knowing that you're working with square material, and it's going to make it much easier when you shape it. So then you've got to come up with whatever shape it is that you're doing. Whether you can get a little ogee shape in here, sort of one of these little curved ones. Now the thing you do have to remember is the way in which this is coming in here. And so your high spot, if your The spot where you're taking the most off is closest to the fence. The spot where you're taking the least off is in the high end. The things you need to actually shape this is really files. Little triangular files, little flat files, any little sort of tiny files that you can make whatever it is you want depending on how delicate the actual molding shape is. And eyes in the beholder. I find a round sort of chainsaw file like this, single cut chainsaw file, which I think it's a single cut, that works best for doing your angles. If you've got some other different shape files, that might make it a little bit easier. And the other thing is either some layout fluid, the blue stuff thing, or you can just use a Sharpie to mark it out so you can sort of trace the shape. So we simply come in and just black the surface. We're doing metalworking here, so this is just a quick way of doing it. What we want to do is let that dry. And then you come in with an awl or something that can stretch the surface, a sharpened up nail. This is just my homemade awl. Now, bear in mind, you need to work out the shape that you're doing. So if we're taking out more on the bottom here, we might shape less down this corner, more up out on this corner, because you're negative, the higher up you come here, the less you're taking off that side. So if you wanted to do some sort of an OG shape, now I'm not that experienced at it, but you can see I've scratched that in there, so then we just file that out. And now we're going to work up here. So now you can see what I can see, and I know it's very difficult to see that scratch mark. I can see it. That's all that really matters. It's never going to be easy. Now I'm going to wear hearing protection for this because this is going to be loud in here. Because this is a lot of flat material, you can bring your flat file in, which is what I'm going to do first. Just my single cut file. It cuts much faster than the round one. So we can see I'm a few mil off here, and I'm just going to do as much as I can with this before I move on to the other file. So we're starting to get close to the profile. It is moving a little bit, so I just need to adjust it slightly. So you can start to see here why little tiny files, so little flat files and stuff, help you to actually get your shape much easier. And to smooth it out, even with these round files, you can sort of draw a file, which is just pulling it across the surface. And you can see the shape I've ended up with here. It could be dug out just a tiny bit here. I actually need a larger round file, so that might be something I'd go out to get if I was making an OG like this. I haven't actually used one of these OG shaped in these scrapers before, normally just a round bead, and it works really well for that. I've used the blades in the past for this sort of shape, but today we're going to be using the scratch stock. So let's jump down here, get this in our holder, and see how well it works. But before we put this in our holder and use it, the very last step, which is the same step you use to sharpen it, we need to take the burr off. Just by moving it back and forwards. We just don't want a burr on these edges, you want a nice sharp edge, and as that scrapes through you should feel it. So I'm going to get it right up against my fence here, and then we're going to put some screws in it. So yeah, one screw in this case is probably enough. That's locked it in place because we already had quite a tight curve. But as I said, machine screws, so you've got enough on the end and you can do it up and down to adjust it, is actually better than just a wood screw. But in a pinch with a cheap holder, quick holder like this, A wood screw just does the job. You just need to make sure you reference it back on that fence each time you move it. Or you can do it like this. You can see with the thinner stuff, if it does ridge like this, you come back the other way and it just cleans it up. It does get a little jammed up in here, so just watch it. So we can see that shape's taken place, and you'll notice after you do a few practices whether you need to adjust your cutter on your scraper like that and get the file out and adjust any sort of ridges you're not happy with, or you can just sand it afterwards or something like that to sort any of your indiscrepancies out. Like you could sand it with a foam sanding block or something like that if you wanted to just smooth it out a little bit. That is an option. Now, I got a piece down here with some end grain. I just wanted to show you that yes, this can work on end grain. It's not as easy as it is on the straight grain, but it's not going to tear the fibers out to the same degree as a blade. So let's have a look. One thing you do want to do when you're on the end here, when you're doing end grain, is you want to pull towards that end grain just so it doesn't split it out, because it can still grab it and split it. And although I haven't finished it, you can see that shape is starting to take shape. I don't need to make that on here right now, so I'm not going to continue with it. And we can see that it's matched the shape that we had here because it's the same molding piece. So there you have it, folks. That's the scratch stock, the most basic tool you could ever make. And it's great that you're able to make this yourself. It's just a piece of scrap wood and an offcut of an old saw plate or any piece of metal really that you can shape that doesn't bend when you're using it. That is ideal, around that 1.5 mil. So if you like this video, please do like and subscribe down below. While you're down there, do sound off in the comments. Do you like the scratch stock? Have you used a scratch stock? Maybe even share your favourite shaping tips and ideas for your own scratch stocks that you've used, and maybe your favourite projects that you use them on too. And if you'd like to see another great basic tool build, do check out the video down below where I make this scratch all. Bye for now.